Hello and welcome to the Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper reading. Today we will be analyzing the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 25th May 2019. The topics to be discussed today are reflected on your screen and the time stamping for the same has been provided in the description box below. So let's begin. This news appears on page number 9 and is stating that the government will soon launch an action plan to improve the quality of higher education in India. This topic will form a part of GS Paper 2 under the category of issues relating to education. Now, as stated, the context of the news is that the Ministry of Human Resource Development is planning to launch an action plan on education to improve the quality as well as accessibility of higher education in India in the coming 5 years. Now, over the period of next 100 days, we can expect a lot of new policy decisions by the Ministry of HRD. The first and the foremost of them is the unveiling of the new education policy. Now, this new education policy was a poll promise of the BJP even in the 2014 Lok Sabha elections, and it is finally expected that this new education policy will be released by the end of this month, that is by May 31st. And the ministry is aiming to also invite certain public feedback on this document. Hence, this entire new education policy document can be expected to be finalized by July 1. So, since we are talking about the new education policy, it is also important to know what were the earlier policies of India as far as education was concerned. Now, as soon as India gained independence, a lot of committees and commissions were set up to look into the situation of education in our country. Amongst all these commissions, the most prominent of them was the Kothari Commission, and it was based on this Kothari Commission's report only that the education policy of 1968 was formulated. Then later in the year 1986, the Rajiv Gandhi government announced a new education policy known as the National Policy on Education, and the main aim of this policy was to prepare India for the 21st century. Now, this policy was revised in the year 1992. Following 1992, there wasn't much which was done on the education front, and hence in the 2014 Lok Sabha election, one of the main promises of the BJP government was to rehaul the education policy in our country. Now, under the previous Lok Sabha tenure, in the year 2015, a committee was set up which was headed by the former Cabinet Secretary TSR Subramaniam. Then in the year 2016, a draft national education policy was also unveiled and comments from the public was also invited. But till date, this policy has not been formalized. And then finally in the year 2017, the government set up the Kasturi Rangan Committee who had submitted its report last year. Hence, we can expect that this new education policy will be drawn upon the points and recommendations which have been provided by all these committees, especially the Kasturi Rangan Committee, as well as the draft National Education Policy of 2016. But as stated, it is expected that this policy will be unveiled by May 31st, hence we have to wait till that time. Now, the second thing which has been lined up during this 100-day action plan is that the government will also come out with a 5-year implementation plan or a vision document for higher education in India. Now, though the new education policy will shape the education's future in the document, it is this 5-year vision document or the implementation plan which will actually set out how things will be achieved at the ground level. Now, you should note here that this 5-year implementation plan is largely based on the inputs of the EQUIP project. We will come back to this EQUIP project later. Moving ahead, this 5-year implementation plan will cover themes such as access to education, quality of education, excellence, the governance system in education, research and innovation, the accreditation systems, the use of technology in education, financing of higher education, etc. The third point is that the government intends to add more institution of eminence. Now, although the NDA government had conferred the institution of eminence status only to 6 institutions against the promised 20 institutions, the Ministry of HRD is keen to expand the sanctioned strength of the institution of eminence to 30. Hence, it can be expected that now the sanctioned strength of the institution of eminence will expand from the current 20 to 30. But please keep in mind that currently there are only 6 institutions which have been given this institution of eminence tag. The fourth point is related to the Higher Education Commission of India. Now you must be knowing that the plan to replace UGC with a new body, namely the Higher Education Commission of India, was opposed by the academic community last year. But it is still expected that the Ministry of HRD will make a fresh attempt once more to bring in the Higher Education Commission of India. The fifth point is that the ministry is thinking to bring in a new system of accreditation. And under this new system, ministry plans to decentralize the accreditation process by permitting private agencies in addition to the NAAC to rate the educational institutions. Sixthly, the ministry is thinking to set up a National Research Fund Act. Now the Ministry of HRD, along with the Science and Technology Ministry, plans to set up an umbrella body which will subsume the Science and Engineering Research Body, and this new umbrella body will fund all the research activities in our country. Lastly, in addition to all of these, the ministry is also thinking to set up an online portal which will monitor the filling up of vacant teaching positions across the state, central as well as the private universities. Now these are the few things which we can expect to see in the coming 100 days. But as stated earlier, this is a news in transition because all of these points mentioned are very tentative ones and we'll have to wait and see when all these policy decisions will actually be taken. Now coming to the EQUIP project. The EQUIP is an acronym for Education Quality Upgradation and Inclusion Program. Now the main aim of this program is to bridge the gap between the policy and the implementation in the field of higher education so as to improve its quality and accessibility throughout the country. Just like various other sectors, even in the education sector, India is plagued with the problem of poor implementation. Hence, in this regard, the government has come out with an EQUIP project which wants to bring transformational changes to the higher education system in our country. Now, this EQUIP program has been crafted by 10 expert groups which are led by experts within the government such as the Niti Aayog CEO, Principal Scientific Advisor, former Revenue Secretary as well as some of the corporate chiefs. Now under the EQUIP, what has happened is that these 10 expert groups have presented various draft plans on issues related to higher education in our country, and now all of these draft plans and reports will be compiled into a 5-year education plan which will serve as a vision document in order to bring changes in higher education in our country. Now as stated earlier, we have to wait and see what exactly this new education policy will entail. But at the same time, in order to bring you up to speed with what was the last recommendation of the government as far as the education policy is concerned, let us very briefly talk about the few main points because there is a lot of possibility that this new education policy which will be unveiled in the coming days will have a lot of points from this 2016 draft policy. Now the motto of the new education policy was to educate, encourage and enlighten. Some of the salient features of this new education policy was firstly a focus on preschool education, because currently the government schools in India do not provide any pre-primary education, and due to this preschool education has not received the desired attention. The second aim was curriculum renewal as well as certain examination reforms. Under this, the government and the NCERT plans to carry out certain curriculum reforms to meet the emerging aspirations. Further, a national curriculum will be designed for science, math and English, and various reforms even in the examination will be carried out so as to prevent the high rates of failure. The next thing which was envisaged was that each state will undertake a detailed exercise of school mapping so as to identify schools with low enrollment and inadequate infrastructure. Further, various government schools like Kendriya Vidyalayas, Jawahar Navodaya Vidyalayas as well as the Kasturba Gandhi Balika Vidyalayas were to be expanded as well as upgraded. Next, the policy also focused on inclusive education, wherein the curriculum would have covered the issues of social justice and harmony so as to avoid social discrimination in schools. Further, a zero-tolerance approach on gender discrimination and violence was also envisaged under this draft policy. There was also a suggestion to use ICT or information communication technology in imparting education in our country. The next main point was related to the teacher development and management, wherein transparent and merit-based norms for the recruitment of teachers would have been formulated in consultation with the state governments. Further, all the vacancies in teacher educational institutions would have been filled up. In fact, there was also a suggestion to have a separate cadre for teacher educators, which would have been established in every state. Further, emphasis was given on comprehensive education, wherein physical education, yoga, games, sports, local art and craft, literature, etc. would have been made an integral part of the curriculum and daily routine in the schools. Next, a lot of emphasis was also laid upon open and distant learning, wherein there would have been a restructuring of the National Institute of Open Schooling in order to address the large potential demand for vocational education. Next point is related to the internationalization of education, wherein selected foreign universities will be encouraged to establish their presence in India through collaboration with Indian universities. Last but not the least, the government had promised to increase the financing in the education sector to at least 6% of the GDP as a priority. Now, these are not exhaustive points, but were some of the main points which this draft education policy spoke about. The details of these points have been provided for in the PDF. But again, please keep in mind that we have to wait for the final policy to come out to know what exactly the government has planned for the education sector in the coming 5 years. With this, let's move on to our next news. Now, this news appears on page number 15 and is stating that the RBI is thinking to bring in a liquidity coverage ratio even for the NBFC sector. This topic will fall under GS Paper 3 under the category of issues related to the Indian economy. And separately also, the liquidity coverage ratio can be an important topic even from the perspective of the prelims. Now, the context of this article is that in order to strengthen the asset liability management of the NBFCs and in order to help the NBFCs tackle the liquidity issue, the RBI has released a draft circular to make the liquidity coverage ratio applicable even for the NBFCs or the non-banking financial companies. Now, this liquidity coverage ratio was introduced post the 2008 global crisis as a part of the Basel III norms, because it was realized that one of the reasons for the 2008 great financial crisis was the lack of liquidity with the banks and financial institutions. Hence, in order to improve the bank's short-term resilience to liquidity shocks, the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision introduced the liquidity coverage ratio as part of the Basel III norms. So, therefore, liquidity coverage ratio is designed to ensure that banks, and in this case the NBFCs, have some kind of liquidity buffer so that they can survive liquidity stress or shocks for at least 30 calendar days. So, to simply say, liquidity coverage ratio is a kind of a liquidity buffer which will ensure that the NBFCs have a certain stock of assets which can help them to sail through a liquidity stress for a period of at least 30 days. Now, technically, liquidity coverage ratio is defined as the stock of high quality liquid assets over the total net cash outflows over the next 30 calendar days. Before we move ahead, you should know that this liquidity coverage ratio is proposed or is rather applicable to all the deposit taking NBFCs and all the non-deposit taking NBFCs whose asset size is above 50 billion or 5,000 crores. Hence, the LCR will be applicable for all deposit taking NBFCs, and in the non-deposit taking NBFC category, it will be applicable to those NBFCs whose asset size is more than 5,000 crores. Now, coming to what is a high quality liquid asset. Now, high quality liquid asset is cash or any other asset which can be converted into cash quickly through sale without no significant loss in value. Hence, a high quality liquid asset means any liquid asset that can be readily sold or can be immediately converted into cash at a little or no loss of value. Now, for the NBFCs, there are various assets which can be considered as a high quality liquid asset, but the main of them is firstly cash itself, second is government securities, and third is highly rated corporate bonds. Now these highly rated corporate bonds are those corporate bonds which have been rated AA or above by any eligible credit rating agencies. Now please bear in mind that the circular has provided a long list of assets which can be included as a high quality liquid asset. Knowing the name of all of them is immaterial, but you can broadly remember that cash, government security and highly rated corporate bonds fall within the category of high quality liquid assets. Now moving ahead to what is total net cash outflow. Total net cash outflow is defined as the total expected cash outflow minus the total expected cash inflow for the subsequent 30 calendar days. That is to say, for the next 30 days, whatever will be the expected cash outflow minus whatever will be the expected cash inflow, that would amount to a total net cash outflow. So for example, if for the next 30 days, the outflow is expected to be 400 rupees and the inflow is expected to be 300 rupees, then the total net cash outflow will be 100 rupees. Now this RBI circular has said that this LCR requirement shall be binding on the NBFCs from 1st April 2020 and then in a calibrated manner it will be increased. That is to say, this LCR requirement will be progressively increased in equal steps till it reaches the required level of 100% by April 1st, 2024. So when we say that the LCR should be minimum of 100% by the year 2024, we mean that the stock of high quality liquid asset should at least be equal to the total net cash outflow. So for example, if the total net cash outflow is 100, then if the NBFC has to maintain a 100% LCR, then they have to have 100 rupees equivalent of high quality liquid assets. And if we say that it needs to maintain 60%, then that would mean that if the total net cash outflow is 100, then at least they should have 60 rupees worth of high quality liquid assets with them for a period of next 30 days. So basically this was all what the concept of LCR talks about. From the perspective of your prelims, remember that the LCR was introduced as part of the Basel III norms and it is basically a kind of a liquidity buffer. Remember the formula for calculating LCR, which is the stock of high quality liquid assets over the total net cash outflows over the period of next 30 days. Please also remember to which all NBFCs this will be applicable, which basically includes all the deposit taking NBFCs and for the non-deposit taking NBFC who have an asset size of more than 5,000 crores or 50 billion rupees. Moreover, remember what is a high quality liquid asset. That is any asset which can be readily converted into cash with little or no significant loss in value. Lastly, please remember LCR will be implemented in a calibrated manner and that though the main goal is to achieve 100%, this has to be achieved only by 2024. But to begin with, in the year 2020, it will be started from 60%. With this, let's move on to our next news. This next news appears on page number 12 and it highlights the main foreign policy decision and meets that need to be undertaken by the new government in the coming month of June 2019. Now this topic will fall under the category of international relations. And though this article is not particularly talking about any specific issue, but has listed several policy decisions which will be on the agenda of the government in the coming month. Now the first issue facing the new government is related to the first bilateral visit by the Prime Minister. Now traditionally, the first bilateral visit by Indian Prime Minister has been to a country in the SAARC neighborhood. And considering the fact that Bhutan and India celebrated their 50th year of diplomatic ties in 2018, this article expects that PM Narendra Modi will visit Bhutan in the new government. Secondly, a Shanghai Cooperation Head of State Summit is going to be held in June 2019 and it is yet to be seen whether Indian PM and Pakistan PM will engage on a bilateral meet on the sidelines of this SCO summit. The third point is related to the various issues surrounding Pakistan because Pakistan had said that it will open the Pakistani airspace after the conclusion of the Indian elections which were closed after the Balakot airstrike. Similarly, progress is expected on the Kartarpur corridor issue and also on the issue to the access of the Sharda temple in POK. Further, India will attend the G20 summit, which is to be held in Osaka, Japan in June 2019. Further, India has to take a decision on the US sanctions on the Iranian oil import, the decision of which had been put on hold to wait for the conclusion of the Indian elections. Lastly, the United States could soon announce its withdrawal of GSP status to Indian imports, and the US continues with the tariffs on several Indian goods. Further, India has also announced retaliatory tariffs. However, since both the countries are working on signing a trade deal, India keeps on postponing their imposition on the US imports. Hence, this trade deal between India and US as well as the reaction to the GSP withdrawal is expected to occur soon. Now, all these issues which we discussed are very broad in nature and will not be asked together in one question. But we discussed this article so that you can know what will be the immediate agenda of the government as far as the foreign policy is concerned. So now that we have listed out these issues, you can expect a lot of development on these lines in the coming months. With this, let's move on to our next news. This article appears on page number 15 and says that the RBI has decided to infuse 15,000 crore rupees in the Indian market via the open market operations. Hence, in our discussion today, we'll be talking about what is open market operations, and open market operations become a very important part of the Indian economy section. The open market operations form a part of the monetary policy of the RBI, which basically refers to all those operations and decisions by the RBI which it uses to control the money supply in the economy. Now, open market operations refer to the buying and selling of the government security by the RBI. Now, the objective of the open market operation is to adjust the rupee liquidity conditions in the economy. So thus, if the RBI wants to inject cash or liquidity into the economy, then in that case, the RBI will buy or purchase the government securities. Because obviously, if RBI is buying the government security, then in order to buy that government security, it has to pay back to the market or to the bank. Hence, when the RBI pays back, it in a way injects liquidity or the cash supply in the economy. Similarly, on the other hand, if the RBI wants to absorb or suck out the excess cash or liquidity in the economy, then it will sell the government securities. And now, when the RBI is selling the government security, the market or the bank, when they will buy this security from the RBI, then of course they have to give money to the RBI in order to purchase this government security from the RBI. Hence, when they give the money to RBI, the excess liquidity or the cash in the economy is sucked out. Now, though this article majorly was dealing with the open market operations, but since we are talking about the open market operations, we will very briefly look at the other tools of monetary policy which the RBI uses to control the monetary supply and liquidity in the economy. Now, the first category is of reserve ratios. As the name suggests, the banks have to set aside a certain percentage of reserves as is directed by the RBI. The first is the cash reserve ratio. Now, as the name suggests, cash reserve ratio refers to that percentage or portion of deposits that the banks are required to be kept as cash with the Reserve Bank of India. Hence, the percentage of deposits that the bank would be required to maintain with the RBI in the form of cash is known as cash reserve ratio, and presently it stands at 4%. Now, you should note here that the RBI does not pay any kind of interest on this cash reserve ratio deposits of these banks. The second kind of reserve ratio is the statutory liquidity ratio. Now, the statutory liquidity ratio refers to the percentage of deposit that the banks are required to maintain with themselves in the form of liquid assets, that is in the form of cash, gold or government securities. So, whatever percentage of their entire deposit which these banks have to maintain with themselves in the form of liquid assets like cash, gold and government security, that percentage of deposit is known as the statutory liquidity ratio, and currently it stands at 19.5%. The next category of monetary policy tools are the policy rates. The first is the bank rate. Now, bank rate, very simply put, is the interest rate which is charged by the RBI when it gives long-term borrowings. Hence, when banks borrow long-term funds from the RBI, they have to pay a certain rate of interest, and this rate of interest is known as the bank rate. The second policy rate is the repo rate. Now, repo rate's full form is repurchase obligation. To simply say, repo rate is the rate at which the banks buy from the RBI on short-term basis. Now, practically what happens is that today if a bank requires cash on a short-term basis, what the bank will do is that the bank will put certain government securities as a collateral with the RBI and will get into an agreement that this bank will repurchase these securities back at the end of the prescribed period, which is for a very short term. So here when the bank gives the RBI the government securities, the RBI will give, for example, 100 rupees to the bank for this government security. Now let's say the prescribed period was 1 day only. So after 1 day, what will happen is that this bank will repurchase this government security back from the RBI by paying certain money to the RBI. And here the money which the bank will pay will be 106 rupees, because this buying of the government security back by the bank will include the repo rate or the repurchase rate of 6%. Therefore, when the bank will buy the government security back from the RBI, it will pay an additional 6 rupees, which is equal to the 6% repo rate. The next is the reverse repo rate, and as the name suggests, it is same, but in this case, it is the rate which the RBI pays to the bank when it borrows from them for a short period. So under the reverse repo rate, what will happen is that RBI will borrow certain money from the bank, and in return of that money, it will deposit certain government securities with the bank. And then after the prescribed period is over, it will try and buy back those government security from that bank. So when the RBI is trying to buy back the government security, it will pay certain money to the bank, and the interest which the RBI will now pay to the normal commercial banks is known as the reverse repo rate. And currently the reverse repo rate stands at 5.75%. You should know that these are not the exhaustive list of the monetary policy tools which the RBI uses, but these are the most basic and the main ones. With this, let's move on to our next news. This news appears on page number 24 and states that the SpaceX has launched the first 60 satellites of its Starlink satellite constellation. This news will be important from the perspective of the science and technology part. Now the SpaceX has launched about 60 satellites in the low Earth orbit, and these 60 satellites are part of the Elon Musk's new internet service known as the Starlink. Hence, under this project of Starlink, a planned constellation of satellites is envisaged which are capable of beaming signals for high-speed internet service from space to the customers around the globe. So these satellites are launched so that they can provide high-speed internet service on Earth. Now in each network, these tiny satellites orbit closer to Earth as compared to the traditional communication satellites because of a technological shift wherein laser technology and computer chips have made such a thing possible. Further, as per Elon Musk, there are about another 400 satellites which are required for a minor coverage and about 800 satellites which are required for a moderate coverage. Further, you should know that the Federal Communication Commission of the United States has given SpaceX the permission to launch almost 12,000 Starlink satellites in the low Earth orbit in order to achieve the ambitious target of global internet coverage. So in this, please remember what is the Starlink project, which is basically a project to provide global internet service with the help of satellites. With this, let's move on to our next news. This next news is an editorial appearing on page number 10 and is in the context of the change in the kilograms definition. Now this entire news about the change in the kilograms definition along with the associated concepts has been comprehensively covered by Baswa sir in the DNS dated 17th November 2018. You can refer to this DNS for more information on this issue. So now with this, let's move on to our practice questions. Now, based on our today's discussion, here is the first set of your prelims practice question. Please pause the video and we'll discuss the answer after 5 seconds. Question number 1 is in respect with the cash reserve ratio. The first statement, it is the ratio which the banks have to maintain with the RBI in form of liquid assets. Now, this is incorrect. Now, as the name suggests, cash reserve ratio is the ratio of the deposits which the banks have to maintain with the RBI in the form of cash. Now, though liquid assets do include cash, but even government securities and gold come in the category of liquid asset. Hence, the statement would become incorrect. Second, the banks receive interest on the reserves from the RBI. This is incorrect. The RBI does not give any kind of interest to the banks on keeping the cash reserve ratio with it. Hence, the right answer to this question is D, neither 1 nor 2. Question number 2 reads, which of the following are associated with education in India? The first, Kothari Commission. This is correct. And it was based on the recommendation of the Kothari Commission only that the education policy of 1968 was formulated. Second, Kasturi Rangan Committee. This is correct. And it was established in the year 2017. Third, Sunil Mehta Committee. This is incorrect. Sunil Mehta Committee deals with NPA problem of the banks. Fourth, TSR Subramanian Committee. This is correct. And this committee was constituted in the year 2015. Hence, the right answer becomes C, 1, 2 and 4 only. Now, here is the second set of prelims practice question. Please again pause the video and solve them. We'll discuss the answer after 5 seconds. Question number 3 is in reference to the liquidity coverage ratio. The first statement, it was introduced as part of the Basel III norms. This is correct. Second, it is the amount of high quality liquid assets which need to be maintained to last 30 days of liquidity stress. Now, this is also a correct statement. Hence, the right answer to this question becomes C, both 1 and 2. Question number 4 reads, Starlink project often seen in news is, and the right answer is A, group of satellites providing high-speed internet services. With this, we come to an end for today's discussion. Let's move to the question for the day.